Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of RPGs with Paddy. I'm Paddy. Today we're going to be looking at the second entry and the first real entry where you actually go into the information for New Gamemaster Month. So I will be looking today, I'll be doing 3 separate videos for RuneQuest, for Trail of Cthulhu and for Numenera. So let's have a look and see what is available there. So if you go to the website and you'll see that this is the next part that they have up. Initial planning for your game session. So there's quite a bit of information here. Feel free to read through it here. But the most important things are that there's going to be 8 sessions and 8 posts. And this is already number 2. So we're making good progress. And they say each task that they give you for those 8 sessions, those 8 activities, it might take you about an hour or so. And so maybe you're thinking, is it always this much work? So you're putting in about 8 hours of preparation just for one game? But as this article reassures you, it's not all that bad. First of all, this is just little bits of work throughout the month. But also it's teaching you the game system. Once you have the game system and the core rules, that really represents the bulk of the work. And it gets a lot easier going forward. So don't think that every time you play, you're going to have to put in a month's preparation time before. This is just to help you build up to that first session. After you've got that first session sorted, you'll be much easier. It will be much easier for you to run your next session. Okay, so there's a little bit of information about setting it up digitally as well. I won't be focusing on that, but feel free to read that if you want, but it's fine anyway. It's nothing too much. Most of the Roll20 information will be here. But again, I won't be going through it in details. So, although I said I will be doing 3 videos, which I will, all 3 of them for Numenera, Trail of Cthulhu and RuneQuest focus on these main issues that you should get started with immediately. So the first one is choose a time and a place. So the website recommends the weekend of January the 27th, that would work nicely because it lines up with the end of this program, the New Gamemaster Month. So you finish the program and then you immediately start your first session. But of course, if that doesn't suit you, choose another time that suits both you and your players. And I would say if you have many people who are interested in doing it at the same time, there might be difficulty scheduling that. And if you can't get a time that suits everyone within, say, the first 2 weeks after finishing this, just play the session without everyone. It's really important to get that first session under your belt, and you can always run the other sessions or the same scenario for some of the missing players in the future. But it's really important to use this momentum that you have from New Gamemaster Month to have that first session within about 2 weeks, I would recommend, if at all possible. Yeah, the next thing is to wrangle your players. I love that is sometimes the absolutely perfect description, wrangling your players. So usually for most role-playing games, 4 to 5 players is best, but I would say 2 or 3 players is fine too. I would recommend not going too high though. If you've got 6, 7, 8 players, it is probably just easier to run 2 sessions. For a few reasons. First of all, it will be much easier to arrange a time that suits everyone. And also, you can just run the same session twice. So say you have 8 players who want to play. You can have 4 players playing one week, and then another week you run the same scenario for different players. This really lets you relax a bit. You've already done the prep for the session once. You'll just be doing it again. But also, any parts you were unsure about running the first time, you can see, can you improve it in your second session? So I think that's a really good situation if you are fortunate enough to have, say, 8 players who want to play. And basically, the last thing there as well is that they recommend this website, whenisgood.net. This is a very useful website, and I'll just show you here. Basically, you'll just set up a time like this, where everyone can highlight what times are suitable for them, and then you can all clearly see what is the suitable time. So I think that's maybe the best one. So choose a time that's suitable for you, and then try to get your players signing up for that. Okay, so here we are with Numenera. So we've already gone through choosing a time and a place and wrangling your players. The adventure that you're going to run is in Numenera Discovery on page 363, and you can have a look through this if you want, but there's no need to do it just yet. Actually, I would recommend maybe not looking at it just now unless you have some free time, because Numenera has a little bit more pre-reading than the other systems, the ones that I'm going to run anyway. So I would say, first of all, do the next task that we're going to do, and if you have some spare time, you can kind of flick through Taker of Sorrow. So down at the bottom, they'd say do a little initial reading. Read part 1 of Numenera Discovery from page 11 to about, it's only about 10 pages, yeah. But this is really important as it gives you kind of like the fundamental background of it. So let's have a quick look at that then. So just before we begin, I'd like to point out that, here, let me just zoom in for a little bit. I love the inclusion of this little sidebar here with kind of small footnotes, but also links to other pages as well, where, especially upon rereading, where you're trying to find the link to that, really, really helpful for game masters and for players kind of reading through it. So what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to read through all of this, but I'm just going to point out some of the key points for it. Basically, this is the 9th world, and there have been 8 previous worlds or epochs before. We don't know much about them, but each had a civilization that rose to supremacy and then died off. And each of the previous worlds left some remnants behind that we can use now. But in particular, the most recent 4 civilizations are the ones we're going to see the most. So one of the main things about this game is discovering the secrets of past civilizations. So it says, for example, here, the soil beneath your feet might actually be artificial soil. That mountain that you see in the distance might actually be an artificial structure. A lot of things we can't understand the technology for it. It seems like magic to us. So Numenera are what we call remnants. So here we go. What we call remnants from the past civilizations. And possibly they have connections with aliens or other dimensions as well. And they can have positive effects or negative effects, depending on it. There is only one continent, and it's called... No, I don't know. But down in the southern part of it, there's a collection of settled lands, kingdoms, we'll say, connected, called Steadfast. And there is a powerful organization of Aeon priests called the Order of Truth, led by the Amber Pope. So this is a religion devoted to science and devoted to learning about the past and the past civilizations. But also each of these settled lands or these kingdoms has its own ruler, but the Amber Pope has a certain amount of power over all of them as well, a certain amount of respect as well. Kind of similar to the Pope would have been anyway. Out in the wilds, there are other Aeon priests who also study the past, but they don't really follow the Amber Pope, and so they are not part of the Order of Truth. That's just a little bit of background for you. The regular people of the 9th world are simple and somewhat resembling medieval fantasy. They have access to the Numenera, but they don't know exactly how to use them all the time. The priests can suggest possible uses for them, but without much certainty. Some people, the adventurers, will go off to find new relics, and then the priests try to understand what they are and how to use them. Most people are humans, but there are several abhumans, mutants, crossbreeds, genetically engineered. But there's also something called visitants, who are non-native species of Earth, but who live here now, and they've lived here so long that they're also, ignorant of the past as much as anyone else is. So the Numenera, so these artifacts of the past, are divided into three types. There's artifacts, ciphers, and oddities. So artifacts are generally kind of large items, and large is, subjective, of course, but basically something that can be used multiple times. The example they give here is a belt that creates a shield of invisible force to protect the wearer, or a flying skiff. Who protects the wearer, or a flying skiff that carries people and cargo from one place to another. Both of those would be considered artifacts. So basically, the current civilization doesn't have the technology to create that, but the remnants of past civilizations is there, so we can use it. We just don't know how to make it. And so it says large devices, but that might encompass a belt, or it might encompass a flying skiff. On the other hand, ciphers are usually small and minor devices that are one-time use only. So they have like one charge maybe left in them, or they're just meant for single use. It could be, so the example that they give, a quick injection designed to repair physical damage, or a handheld object that, when manipulated properly, becomes a weapon that explodes with tremendous force, so like a grenade or something like that. But ciphers are dangerous when gathered together because they create radiation and harmonic frequencies that are inimical to human life. So it's bad to have too many of them, basically. And then finally, oddities are other relics that have no real clear purpose, but they're doing something. But there's some kind of strange function, but you can't understand what they're doing. And it says here at the bottom, not everything from the prior worlds can be understood. In fact, much of it cannot. And I think this is great as well. There are some things that you'll find and you want to try to figure out what they mean, what they do, but some things are just so alien to us that we won't be able to figure it out. Okay, so the ninth world is set on Earth, about 1 billion years into the future from now. But the current iteration of civilization is only kind of equivalent to our medieval time. But because of the remnants of previous civilizations, they do have access to a lot of knowledge and technology. For example, zippers, plastic bags, ink pens, good hygiene, some knowledge about diseases and stuff like that. However, when discovering something new, similar to something we have in our present time, the 21st century, for example, cars and guns, it will not be immediately understandable to the denizens of the ninth world. So the players have to experiment, research, and use their skills to identify and use what they find. An additional complication is that the Numenera does not have to serve its original purpose. So, for example, an energy cell for a car might have been used as a grenade or something like that. And then down at the bottom, there's a very nice quote that I wanted to include here as well. Welcome to the ninth world, where every discovery might save you or kill you, but you won't know until you try. So that's, really important to, tell to your players as well. Kind of that's the setting. It's going to be a lot about discovery and experimentation. So next we move on to how to play Numenera, and most of it is built on rolling a d20 or a 20-sided die. If you don't have one, there are many online rollers, but they're also, freely available d20s. That's the only dice that, the d20 is the only dice that you will need for this game. Although if you have other polyhedral dice, that'll be fine as well. Okay, so basically, when you're trying to do something, you never have to roll. Just tell the Game Master what you want to do, and the Game Master will set a difficulty for it anywhere from 1 to 10. Now, if it's a really simple, mundane task, so for example, this one, task difficulty 0 is something routine, opening a door or something like that, an unlocked door. That doesn't require any skill. You're going to be able to do it, so there's no roll involved. But if the game master thinks that there's some chance that it might be difficult, some chance that you might fail, then they will give you a difficulty. They will set a difficulty for the task. And over here you can see that the task difficulty goes from 1 to 10. Well, 0 to 10. But ignore the zeros. So from 1 to 10. Depending on that number, you will try and roll a number on your dice, and your target number is always 3 times the difficulty number. So for example, a difficulty 3, you have to roll a 9 or a higher on your d20. So if it's almost an impossible task, you have to roll the difficulty is 10, you have to roll a 30 on a d20. That is impossible, so let's have a look at how we can do that. So there's a few ways that you can decrease the difficulty of a task with character skills, favorable circumstances, or equipment. So the example here is given if a player wants to climb a wall. The Game Master originally says that it's a difficulty 6, so intimidating. Normal people almost never succeed. Wow. So you have to roll an 18 or higher. But if your character is trained in climbing, then, and we'll get onto that a little bit later, then the difficulty would be reduced to 5, which means you only have to roll a 15 or higher. But that's if your character is trained in climbing. If your character is specialized in climbing, so even more trained, then the difficulty would be reduced to 4, and you would only need a 12 or higher to succeed. When you are trained in a skill, you are reasonably skilled in that action or area, and you will reduce the difficulty by 1. When you are specialized in a skill, you are very skilled in that area, and you will reduce the difficulty by 2. Anything else that reduces difficulty, an item, an ally, is referred to as an asset. But assets, the maximum an asset can reduce difficulty by is 2. Just remove that. So even if you have loads of things going in your favor, loads of items, the maximum you can reduce it by is 2. So from 6 to 4, from 4 to 2. You can also reduce the difficulty by applying effort. This is a little bit more complicated, and we'll look at it in a future video. But it's just using up a resource to illustrate you using more effort, which will again bring that difficulty level down. Equally, the difficulty may be increased through adverse conditions. For example, particularly windy or icy conditions would make climbing harder. But this should be included by the initial assessment by the GM. If you ever bring the difficulty level down to 0, you automatically succeed and you don't need to roll. You can even bring the difficulty of an attack roll to 0 and automatically succeed. So this table is nice just to get a quick look at, if a character suggests doing something you hadn't thought of, just a quick look here. What do you think the difficulty is? Trained people have a 50-50 chance? Okay, it's a difficult challenge. A task worthy of tales told for years afterwards? Okay, it's going to be heroic. It's going to be, you have to roll a 24. So that's a really, really nice table. So if there is no roll, so if the difficulty is 0, there's no chance for failure. But there's also no chance for remarkable success either. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in this video. So now on to combat. When attacking a creature, it will have a difficulty level just like this. So it's often just the creature's level. So the example they give is a level 2 bandit would have a difficulty of 2, so a target number of 6. So you have to roll a 6 or higher to hit. When a creature attacks a player, the GM doesn't roll. Instead, the player rolls to defend. And again, it will be a similar target number as well. You don't roll for damage. So if the target number is 6 and you succeed, then your weapon, depending on your weapon, will just do a set amount of damage. You don't have to roll for it. So each weapon does a specified number of damage. Armor can also reduce the amount of damage you take from each hit. So, for example, if you got hit for 2 damage, a leather jerkin with armor 1 would reduce the damage you actually take from 2 down to 1. There are 3 types of physical weapons: light, medium, and heavy. Light weapons do 2 damage, but they reduce the difficulty of attack by 1 step. So imagine again we are fighting that bandit who's a level 2. The target number is 6. If I'm using a light weapon, then for me, and only for me, the difficulty of hitting him would be reduced down to 3. Because I'm using a very light weapon. And the examples that they give are things like punches and kicks, clubs, knives, hand axes, daggers, and things like that. Medium weapons... I'm sorry. Did I mention light weapons always do 2 damage? Medium weapons do 4 damage, but they have no effect on the difficulty. So it's going to remain that difficulty 6. And generally, for a weapon to be medium, it can be used one-handed, even if it's actually used two-handed. So something like a spear, you might often use it two-handed, but it could also be used one-handed. Then it's a medium weapon. Other things like a long sword and a staff and stuff like that would also be medium weapons. Heavy weapons do 6 points of damage. So this is nice and easy to remember. 2, 4, 6. Heavy weapons do 6 points of damage, and you need 2 hands to use them. These include things like great hammers, huge axes, heavy crossbows, and stuff like that. And just very rarely, you might get a bonus to your roll. So for example, if you roll a 16, but you have a +1 bonus, then the number that you rolled is actually a 17. These bonuses can also stack. So if you have 2 + 1, you've got +2. If you ever get up to a +3, count it as an asset and reduce the difficulty by 1. So do you remember assets were anything that helps to reduce the difficulty, for example, with an ally or from an item. And remember, assets are limited to reducing it by 2 steps. So if you manage to get a number of bonuses that add up to a +3, then remove that those bonuses and just bring down the difficulty level by 1. There are a few special rules if you roll particularly high on your D20. If you roll a 19, and this is ignoring any bonuses, just if your dice actually shows 19, then you will have it will have a minor effect. So if you're in combat, it will do +3 damage if you rolled a 19. Or it can have another effect that you choose. For example, you knock your enemy back, or you get a particular advantage on them. Some other effect like that. Out of combat, if you roll a 19, you succeed particularly well in what you're trying to do. If you roll a 20, a natural 20, you have a major effect. So in combat, this is +4, or some other effect of your choice as well, as long as the GM okays it. Outside of combat, something beneficial happens. For example, performing a task twice as fast. Also, only in combat, if you roll a 17, it's +1 damage. If you roll an 18, +2 damage. So in combat, 17 +1, 18 +2, 19 +3, 20 +4. Outside of combat, only 19 and 20 will have some kind of beneficial effect. And if you roll a 1 on your die, it will always have some bad consequences where the GM will introduce some kind of complication. So there are 4 measurements of distance. Immediate distance is anything within a few steps, maximum 10 feet, 3 meters. Short distance is between 10 feet and 50 feet, so 3 to 15 meters. Long distance is from 50 to 100 feet, so 15 to 30 meters. And very long distance is 100 to 500 feet, 30 to 150 meters. The distances are supposed to be just a reference, not something to be measured out. Just think which of the categories it falls into. When you are moving, or when you're trying to do your turn, you can move within an immediate distance and do an action on your turn. So if something is like a few steps away from you, you can move there and open a door. You can move there and attack someone if it's within a few steps. Or for your turn, you can move a small distance. So something is, say 10 to 50 feet away from you. You can move there. That's your turn. If you are a long distance away, you can try to go that entire distance, although you will have to roll to see if you succeed. So perhaps you might fall down or something like that. Experience points are something that is given to players when a GM intrudes on the story with a new and unexpected challenge. So, for example, if you're having a fight and the GM suddenly says, you drop your weapon, you drop your shield, or something like that, then the GM has to give you 2 XP. Then you must immediately give 1 XP to another player and say why. Maybe they had a good idea, they told a funny joke, or anything like that. And then they get, so the disadvantaged player gets 1 XP, and they give 1 XP to one of their teammates as well. But this player who is being affected by the GM intrusion can refuse the intrusion. They don't get any XP in that situation, and they actually have to spend 1 XP that they already have to cancel that out. If they don't have any XP, they can refuse an intrusion. Now, this is just me talking here, but if this is your first time GMing an RPG, I would say that, again, in my opinion, a GM intrusion should be used to make things more dramatic or more interesting. Do not use it to punish the players. Especially as this game, Numenera, is not really a combat-focused game, but an exploration and discovery game. You don't want to create an atmosphere of GM versus players. You're not trying to beat the players. You're trying to create an interesting narrative for them. So I'm sure that this is explained later on somewhere in the book, but I just thought I'd share my opinion on it, as I think it's very important. Yes, dropping your weapon in a battle could be very dramatic and could lead to interesting scenes, but you don't want to lead it to, oh, you're dead now because I made you drop your weapon. Now, that might happen, but you're not trying to just beat them up like that. Okay, another way is that you can get XP is players can get XP between sessions for recovering artifacts or making discoveries during the sessions. You don't get any XP from killing foes. Discovery is the most important thing, hence the name of the game. And that's another point there. Because you don't get XP from killing anything, it does encourage the players to think about other ways where they can, get around an encounter. Maybe sneaking by someone, or, role-playing, talking to them or something like that, or coming to some kind of agreement. XP is mostly used for character advancement, which will be explained later somewhere in the book. But you can always spend 1 XP to re-roll any dice roll, and then you get to keep the better of the 2. So let's say you rolled and it was 2, and you're like, okay, I'll roll again, and I got a 10. Oh, okay, now I succeed. Or if you roll and you got, let's say you're in a fight and you're really hoping for a 20, and you got a 14. You're like, okay, I'll spend 1 XP and I'll roll again. This time you get a 19, so that does an extra +3 damage in the fight. So you get to keep whichever of the 2 is higher. So it's not as if I rolled a 19 and I'm hoping for a 20 and I got a 2, I have to keep the 2. No. You keep whichever one is higher. Okay, and almost at the end now. Ciphers, as mentioned before, these are one-use items. You can carry them around, but you can't have too many because they react poorly together. But characters will also find new ciphers relatively frequently in the game. And because ciphers are always different, the characters will always have new special powers to try. I really love this part because in previous games I've played, I've tried to give a kind of useful magic items to players to reward them throughout the campaign. Useful items to help them overcome something. but they're always worried about using them too early, so they stockpile them. So then when it comes towards the end of the game, I'm starting to think they have all of these items at their disposal. Now I have to make that final encounter more difficult, or else they'll just steamroll through it. But actually, what if they just forget that they have all those items? But also, using these unique items is exciting for players, and they'll get to use them a lot, find new ones. So I think it's really, really good way of getting around that stockpiling thing without just the you don't have enough space in your backpack kind of thing. It's like we don't understand them, but when too many of them get together, bad things happen. And finally, just here, they mention that you might have to roll other dice, but only they mention you'll have to roll between 1 and 100. And they show you an example of how to do this only with d20s. So you'll use the second digit, or the last digit of the first die will be your tens category. And the second digit of your other die will be your units. So for example, if you roll a 17, ignore the 1, the 7, it's going to be 70, and then I roll a 12, take the last one, it's 2, 72. And that's how you get a number between 1 and 100. A little bit strange, but yeah, I would say a lot of people who have these polyhedral dice have a D10 or something, or possibly even a D100. So that is where we're going to leave it for Numenera. So I will enjoy reading through it yourself. If you have any questions about it, please let me know in the comments, and I will see you next time where I don't know what we'll do. I guess we'll find out on the website. All right, take it easy, everyone. Bye.